Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Smithsonian American Art Museum. I'm E. Carmen Ramos, Deputy Chief Curator and Curator of Latino Art, and it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's distinguished Clarice Smith Lecturer, photographer Abelardo Morell. Yay! Perhaps the best word to describe Morell's approach to his medium is wonder, a word that is near and dear to the hearts here at SAAM and Renwick Gallery. Since the 1980s, Morell has turned to the elemental origins of photography to reveal the wondrous possibilities of everyday life. He is best known for his Camera Obscura photographs, which rely on the techniques developed in the ancient world to capture images of the outdoors onto the walls of a darkened room. SAAM owns one of his most renowned Camera Obscura photographs, currently on view on the 3rd floor, which captures a view of Central Park in New York, the city that welcomed a young Morell and his family when they left Cuba in the early 1960s. He has gone on to invent new techniques and approaches that reimagine classic genres like landscape and still life. Morell studied photography at Bowdoin College and at the Yale University School of Art. In addition to SAAM, his works have been collected by major institutions, including the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Art Institute of Chicago, and the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, among many others. We are thrilled to have him here tonight. I want to express our deep gratitude to Clarice Smith, who is also here tonight, for supporting the Clarice Smith Distinguished Lectures in American Art, an annual series begun in 2004 that presents new insights in American art from the perspective of the leading artists, critics, and scholars. We are also joined by special guests, including Anne Collins Goodyear, co-director of Bowdoin College Museum of Art, who has brought a group of guests from Bowdoin College, Morell's alma mater. A few housekeeping details. Following our lecture, there will be a short question and answer period. Please use the microphones on either end of the auditorium to ask questions. After the lecture, there'll be a reception in the Kogod courtyard on the 1st floor. And finally, we ask that you please silence your devices. Without further ado, I welcome Abelardo to the stage.
Thank you, Carmen. Also, thank you, Clarice Smith, for making this possible. It's through these venues that, people like me get to talk about what we do. So it's an invaluable, generous thing that you're doing. So really, very much appreciate it. And to Stephanie, this amazing institution, having her here just feels like a complete package. So. Thank you. These lights need to be on. Some theater guy once said, "Love the art in you, not you in the art." And that's very much how I agree with that. I'm a little boring. Maybe, hopefully, that's not. So I want to start with something I've never quite done before. Maybe I just turned 69, so I'm like, one of those moments you think, oh, geez, how did I get here and what's happened? I know, stupid old man thinking. But I thought about two windows in my past and how, in some ways, these two venues, these two openings, have had something to do with the shape of even my being an artist, like the shape of what I've done in art. And it probably had a little bit of a shock effect in me that maybe opened me up to the idea of how art can deal with, and I hate the word memory because it's so loaded now, remembering certain occasions. So, first window, oops, is this on? Oh, I guess I'll do it here. First window is my house, our house in Cuba in 1959, and if you know your history, 1959 is when the revolution, January 1st, in fact, happened. And whether you are on the political side of, yeah, Fidel was great, or not, the effect it had on a 11-year-old like me really is dramatic. It was quite frightening outside during the revolution, and I was sort of a kept boy anyway by my mother, so I tended to be inside a lot because, you know, oh, who knows, you could drown. But also what was happening outside was not all that enticing, and there was just a lot of violence. And I remember looking a lot through that window. This is our living room window in Guanabo. This would have been the scene where I grew up in Cuba. So the idea of growing up with a lot of light and water and, you know, the generosity of this world, it's the background that I grew up in. But in '59, what was on TVs at that time, we didn't have a TV, but we watched it. Next door was a lot of firing squads. And my father was actually scheduled, as they said, to be one of these people. So that sense of the trauma of the absurdity of history and life and all that really did take a toll on me. So 3 years later, we ended up in New York City, somehow. Best thing that could ever happen to me. We lived in a basement apartment that had 2 windows. This is one of them, where you had to look up to see life, to see America. Everything else, there was no other windows, just those 2 venues. This is the living room. I made this picture in 1962. I bought a brownie, and of course my mother was like, "Why did you take this picture?" You know. Obviously, she was not aware of Arbus's work at the time. Neither was I. But that living room, like my living room in Cuba, were places where I could observe things, maybe out of fear, out of waiting to see how I could learn enough, learn English, learn the customs, whatever. So that became a kind of an important sense of looking. This is a view that would have been seen from if you went upstairs. This is Columbus Avenue and 69th Street. Looks like a Robert Frank or something, just weird. The world did look like that. Now if you go there, it's a lot of yoga and things. Not sure what the progress is. But, so I started envisioning that if I had a camera obscura set up in that apartment, this is what I would have seen. But I had no idea what an artist was. And it took me a long time to figure out some emotional reasonings for it. In 1986, my wife and I had a son named Brady. This is a picture of them. And it was hugely important for me because in some ways it felt like I finally had grown up. I was not that kid looking out to see in fear of the world, but it allowed me to do things. So 5 years later, I made my first camera obscura in that apartment. This is 1991. A little Freud here, a little biography, a little art, but the idea that maybe these camera obscura pictures are related a little bit to a certain confidence of owning the world in some ways and shaping the world with some of my own power. I'll stick with that. But I think there's something to that. Years later, I made some pictures, 5 years later in New York City, and this is the picture that's hanging on the 3rd floor now. The Smithsonian bought this picture soon after I made this picture, which really does make me feel like you guys really knew what you were doing or something. Now, there are millions of dollars now. There's no way you can get this. No, but it was felt very nice that someone could appreciate this weird work early on. But it's a way that an immigrant, for me anyway, the idea that New York, as wonderful as it was a frightening place. Arriving on a Greyhound bus from New Orleans to New York in 1962, November, it's a scary place. It's wonderful, but everything seemed, brimming with mystery and strangeness. So I would say that the other Freud analysis of this would be that in some ways I was then in a position to be confident enough to say, yeah, I know that. It's also, I'm high up too, so there's a kind of a interesting artistic view of an immigrant looking at the world. And Carmen, who put together a brilliant show of Tamayo's work upstairs. It's just a fabulous show. I just got to see it. And got to learn that Tamayo spent a number of years in New York City, sort of like me. It's nice to remember that when you think, oh, it's just me, right? It's hundreds of people have gone through what I went through. There's a certain kind of nice feeling of, being part of something larger. But he has a picture upstairs that is quite wonderful and reminds me of me. And it's a picture of Tamayo with a periscope, a telescope, looking at the city. That's my picture. So there's something interesting about exile and understanding a large complex of things. And totally different pictures, totally different minds, totally different cultures. But at bottom, New York really changed me, and it really changed Tamayo. Because it's a city of ambition, and things are happening, and it really helped a lot. Here's some other New York pictures early on. This is my family, Central Park, 63, I think. That arrow, it belongs to the Plaza Hotel. And of course, where we were at that point, that was like a billion miles away. It's like, Plaza? What is that? Here's another picture from 1962 where the Plaza was overlooking us. Years later, I found a room at the Plaza, a free one, to make pictures. And someone said, we have a nice view of the park. So this is the apartment that I looked into, and I converted. I made 4 pictures in there. This is a spring, a summer, fall, and winter. It took a couple of years to get the right weather, but the idea of sitting in a room that had this changing room really affected the way my timetable in terms of picture making. And of course, I thought about other artists like Monet waiting for light to change on facades and stuff. This is me a little bit rebel without a cause kind of thing. Times Square, when Times Square was really hot, and my family. But it was Times Square, and we didn't know what the hell was going on. So years later, I made this Camera Obscura picture in Times Square. Again, I think it's a way to own it, to remake it in my own wish. This is other pictures I've made in New York. This is from Long Island City, looking at New York at 6 a.m. And I really like the picture, and my sister and I were beginning to pack up, and then someone said, well, let's have lunch first, and we came back, and I noticed that the light was really changing. So this is 6 a.m. 5 p.m. was that, which is so interesting. You don't quite plan these things. Same thing with the Manhattan Bridge. And by now, my early pictures with a Camera Obscura were done with film, which exposures were 6 to 8 hours long. Very a pain in the ass. This is done with a digital camera, which instead of 8 hours, it's more like 4 minutes, which is interesting because now I'm able to capture momentary light. This is morning, afternoon, and evening. So digital is not just fast, convenient, but it also is more like Monet saying, that light, I want that light. You know, so it's really changed the way I make pictures up to this moment. I've been interested in paper for a really long time. As you know, it's toilet paper, it's money, it's garbage bags. It's such a beautiful material, and I'm not going to show any here because there's no time. But I spent a long time photographing books, and I really like those pictures. But it's this symbolic paper. So I've been photographing paper. You know, the garbage, the bags that come for lunch or something, and this is an homage to Weston in some ways. Weston has a beautiful toilet picture that it's a knockout. And this is a little bit like the toilet one. This is my Picasso. These are collages that I've been making with Piranesi books, cutting into them so that the underneath images come through in some new way, so that the surface is malleable and changeable. Also, 3x5 cards. I have like 40,000 of them. I've been buying. I know, I'm running out of space. Because 3x5 cards are like marble. You can make this or that. And you can also make sculpture. This is my son Brady. My daughter Laura. This is my wife Lisa and me. And this is me. So fun because marble is such a beautiful thing, and we admire it a lot, and I do too. But if you find a material that suddenly has the possibility of it being used in a certain way, it becomes very like a great new way of doing things. Tent camera. Okay, I'll explain this. This is a complicated part because photography was not invented till 1839 or so by 3 people. And Niepce, Daguerre, and Mr. Talbot. And he's Talbot is the one who I think, I hope there are no French people here, but he's the guy who won because what he invented was a paper negative, which became a way of making copies. And that's what we had until like 10 years ago. Some of you are still using film. So, but before photography, there are all kinds of optical devices, really interesting ways for artists to draw. This is a camera lucida, which is a very odd stick with a prism, and it's possible, if you're really good, to look at a landscape through it and also see the paper. So it's possible to actually trace a lake and trees and very well. And it was used by a number of people, including Fox Talbot, when he was on a honeymoon in Bellagio in Italy, Lake Como. And a pitiful thing. I mean, no, I mean, it just, he knew it too. He knew how inept he was at drawing. To show you a good example of the use of the Camera Obscura was his friend Herschel. This is Herschel's drawing. It's dramatic. It's not just like, oh, no, it's that. That. So Talbot, in his diaries, talks about the frustration of using a device like that, and in fact, saying something to the effect of, he was remembering an old Camera Obscura with a glass. I wish I could fix these images. Basically photography. So he went back to England, and his friend Herschel developed a fixer that could actually fix the images, and the rest is history. Pre-photography as well, there were all these weird devices where people had these little mini tents with periscopes on them, so an artist could actually, an image could get projected on the paper and you could draw it. I mean, it was really hot. Everybody was sort of using it, you know. I decided to make my own. I got a commission to photograph in West Texas, in Big Bend National Park. Basically, the person who commissioned me was a little naive and says, well, make some camera obscuras in the desert. Like, where's the hotel? Right, I mean, it's just desert. So then I thought, what if I have a portable device that really allows for that portable camera obscura to happen? So I worked with a number of people to develop this thing, which has a periscope sticking out with a lens that looks onto the world, and it comes in straight down onto the dark space. And it was really neat. It worked. It was like, oh my God, I can see my wife walking towards me, you know? The nice thing about this device is that the ground is always what it is. You know, if you're in the desert, you have desert ground. If you're whatever, at the beach, it's a beach. So this is an early experiment in West Texas, and it was a pain. It's like, you know, O'Sullivan and Watkins combined, and the desert. I usually help, but I was filming, so we set up this tent with a periscope and a camera inside, and it was looking towards this area, and that's the image that happened. It was, so it's landscape supplanted onto the dirt itself. And it felt like a really interesting way of addressing photography, and the local ground is the receiver of the image. So after this one, I made a bunch of others, visiting old Watkins territory. This is in Texas as well. William Henry Jackson, who's probably the first photographer to ever photograph, you know, this geyser, Old Faithful. I don't even 1860s, 70s. So I wanted to make a picture there, and lots of permissions, of course. What? You want to put a what? A lot of tourists around that time, when I was making the picture, were like, I didn't know you could camp here, you know. And I'm generally a jokester, so I was like, oh yeah, $10. But I wanted to make a picture of probably the most photographed thing ever in the world. You know, how to make a picture that regains its status in some ways. So this is the picture that came out. And how interesting to, I don't know, I just find this Cuban guy in the middle of John Wayne country. I think it's because I've always wanted to change the world. I never wanted to do the same thing again and again. So it was really interesting way of naming something that has been photographed so many times in a new way. And this is a wonderful device to do that. This is in Maine, Acadia National Park, still some snow, dead grass. So very painterly. Painting has really become, I've always loved painting, but now I really love it. So watch out. Grand Canyon. Cathedral. It's like I'm in the church of F-64, right? This is a Yellowstone in the winter. I know. Again, here, American tourists are like, so what are you guys selling? You know, it's like Prada bags. There were a lot of cops on the other side. We got permission from the mayor of Florence. But I wanted to look at the baptistry, which is sort of this way, mostly because it's such a great symbol or place for the history of art. It was Brunelleschi who, in the 1500s, late 1400s, decided to do a demonstration to prove perspective, visual perspective of the baptistry. And as they say, things were not the same anymore. So only Masaccio was doing stuff in a way that had never been seen before. So I wanted to photograph, so this is my picture of it. Outskirts of Florence. This is in Spain, near where El Greco painted. New York City, rooftops, which I want to do more of soon. Pebbles on a rooftop. And then this feels like it's the end of New York. I mean, it really does feel apocalyptic. The rooftop in New York, this also reminds me of Tamayo's, because he was on a rooftop, that painting, and he's looking at New York. I was on a rooftop in Manhattan looking at Brooklyn, and it felt like Americanness is so interesting to exiles because in some ways it's sort of super sexy and weird and nothing like that where we came from. So in some ways it's kind of fresh. Another tent picture of the Manhattan Bridge. I'm going to change something here. 10 years ago, the MoMA asked me if I would do some work with a writer to do a book. And they do these every year or two, where they produce a special book teaming an artist, a musician, and a writer to make something new. And I had the fortune of being teamed up with Oliver Sacks, like one of my heroes. So we spent a couple days together, and what it was that they wanted to do a book about a chapter in Oliver's The Island of the Colorblind, which is about neurons and perception and brain damage. The chapter that they wanted to do was of cycads and ferns, interesting vegetation in Micronesia. He was interested in everything. So would I make some pictures of cycads and ferns? I thought about it. I was like, it's a little stupid, So I thought about this process called cliché vert, which, as it turns out, was a very interesting method used by French painters in the 50s. Corot, Millet, and a few other artists used this method. And basically, it's a piece of glass, not big, and they would coat it with ink or smoke it with a candle, and then the soot would blacken it. And then on that black piece of glass, they would make drawings. So on the left is the piece of glass that he drew, right? But then, this is a really interesting part. They took that glass and used it as a negative in a darkroom. They put that negative, glass negative, over photographic paper. And they made a positive, photographic positive. Wow, that's a nice hybrid. They exist in several places. The glass is mostly gone, but these beautiful cliché verts, wonderful. Anyway, so I wanted to, here's another Corot from that technique. Beautiful. I mean, he could draw, I can't. But I thought, maybe I'd take ferns, cycads that were sent to me by, I don't know, museums, ink glass plates, impress them on the ink several times, make a kind of a jungle, make something that I like on a glass negative, and then scan it and print it. So here's some of the work that ended up in that book. Almost no photography at all, but I find them beautiful. If it's my mother, I'm not here. This technique reappears a little bit later on. I spent some time in Giverny, where Monet painted, with the Terra Foundation. I had a thing there. I had my tent with me. I went to the Giverny people and said, could I put my tent in Monet's garden? Expecting, it's like, the fuck out of here. So they said, fine. And so when the tourists are not there, it was mine. And the problem with the gardens, and they're beautiful, is that there's not that much space where you can put a tent in, except for gravel, cementy gravel spaces. Anyway, but this is the first one I made. This is 2 views of the garden with gravel. And guess what? When my assistant and I were inside and looked down, we were looking at a Monet. It was perfect Monet. This is a straight picture. And it just dawned on me, it was like, oh, wow, this is super interesting. Then we made more. That's a gardener on the left top. There's a wheelbarrow in there. The Seine, very close to his house, where he actually, Pissarro and Manet, all those guys, hung out. I took a second trip the next year because I wanted to do more beyond the gardens, but I did go back to the gardens. This is the gardens late in the afternoon. And now it's like, it's beautiful, it's perfect pointillism. It's Seurat. But normal. This is not Photoshop bullshit, right? This is my camera, which is a very nice camera, is recording what is. And I love that. That abstraction can come out of this almost a straight photography approach. I asked the gardener, which now he looks like Monet to me. This is early in the morning, and this feels like Corot to me, like Barbizon school painters, who I love. I'm love to be one of those. Then we drove to Rouen, where Monet actually made 33 paintings of the cathedral. 33. It was crazy. He would rent a room, have 5 canvases, 9 in the morning, he would paint it. He had at 2 o'clock, at 5 o'clock, at 3 o'clock, and he would work on many at a time. So we brought our tent to the front of the cathedral. Well, here are some examples. And 33. It's it's totally modern, super modern approach to making art. This is my tent picture in front of the cathedral. So it's stone, meaning stone. And then we found an apartment, abandoned apartment, facing the cathedral. It was really abandoned, on top of a lingerie store. And the whole thing is really kind of creepy, because we would walk in through the lingerie storage rooms, and it was abandoned. So I made some Camera Obscura pictures. This is 11 a.m. This is a Camera Obscura now, just 11 a.m. The sun was not hitting it. 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. These are cypress trees near where he lived. This is in Nieppe, on the beach near where Normandy invasion was. Etretat. A lot of people have painted this. And this is not my painting. This is Monet's painting. But I've always loved this, and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston owns it, so I know it really well. And the guy who was helping us, French guy, well, he spoke French. He said, you know, I know a road that takes me to another road. Anyway, there's a view. And he said, there's that view. Like, okay. So after getting lost a few times, we found it, and this is my picture of it. Very satisfying project. After that, we spent some time in Paris. Here's some Paris Camera Obscuras. This is the train station where Monet took to Giverny. This is just a great day in Paris. An amazing apartment. Just the whole place was covered with hundreds of yards of Hermes curtains. And in the picture, you can tell that it's the quality. So this is one view from this man's house, and then this is the other view. And I just felt like I was on a Fellini circus. It was so fun to see the curtain echoing, the building, and of course a nice dinner waiting. This is on the courtyard of the man's place. Okay, another project. You guys with me? Yes. Okay. Well, I've been asked by different people to tackle certain things. The Goodyears, who were here a number of years ago, asked me if I would do winter in Maine. And of course, we discussed this during a beautiful summer in Maine, so I was like, yeah, of course. And it turned out to be the worst winter they've had in years, so it was brutal. But I made a show called The Mine of Winter. It's a Wallace Stevens poem, a line from a poem. And I love the pitch of, can you do something with it? So I love being commissioned because it makes me think in different ways. This year is Walden, is Thoreau's. It's Thoreau, by the way, in case you're in a sensitive area. If you say Thoreau, they'll not look at you well. It's Thoreau. So it's his 200th anniversary this year. So the museum in Concord said, would you like to do some work around Thoreau? And I thought, okay, Walden Pond, such a famous place. What can I do in Walden Pond? So I began to make different kinds of pictures. And even in college at Bowdoin, I remember this quotation because John Cage, who loved Thoreau, repeated it a lot. Man cannot afford to be a naturalist, to look at nature directly, but only with the side of his eye. he must look through and beyond her. This sense that reality in some ways is too much, that in order to get it, you have to sort of look at it indirectly. I love that sense. Chekhov has the same line, shorter. It's, don't tell me that the moon is shining, show me the glint of light on broken glass. Same idea. Don't show me the obvious. So I made huge panoramas, including this one. This is like 100 pictures of the woods and the lake combined in Photoshop to make a kind of a new creation. And it's about 10 feet long. And I love working that way. It was a new way for me to work. This is a 10 camera picture of the pond itself. He made, Thoreau made his living, he didn't work that much. But he was a teacher, he made pencils, he drew maps for people, surveying properties. This is a map that he drew of Walden Pond. And I wanted to make a map picture of the pond, but not in obvious ways. So I took white flour and I made this. Sort of on the ground, almost the concept of the lake itself. And then the last one I made was very, very much influenced by, Japanese, 19th century Japanese, even earlier works. Ink and paper, the way that water could be rendered in such surprising and fresh ways. So I saw a lot of Japanese art. And then I made a cliché verre. And the cliché verre that I made was inspired by a quotation from Thoreau, which at first I thought it was just crazy. He said, "The pure waters of Walden mingling with the waters of the Ganges." Okay, that's in India. Very odd, and I didn't know how to make of that. And in fact, when Thoreau was living there was a guy named the Ice King, a New England guy who would cut ice from New England ponds and ship them to warm places like Calcutta. Thoreau is looking at this guy cutting ice and thinking the pure waters of Walden mingling with Ganges. I mean, it's perfect. So he was a realist. And it's just so I wanted to make a cliché verre based on the mingling water. So this is a cliché verre I make. It's quite long. It's about 9 feet long. Of just ink. It took me like 3 weeks to make it right, like the Japanese. But I really like the idea of flowing water. I also went to the Morgan Library in New York, who happened to own, of the 40 journals, they own 39. And they were really nice enough to pull them all out for me to photograph, because I wanted to make a picture out of it. The 40th one was owned by the New York Public Library, which they refused to. I said, what, 39 I could make? But anyway, I bought a digital copy of it. So I made a few pictures, combining certain of his diaries. And then the last one, I wanted to do a chronological series from 1 to 40, and like a quilt of some kind. And I love turning that 18th century, 19th century work into something that looks like a soul of wit or something. A recent trip to Florence, 10th picture. These are some camera obscuras I made in the Villa La Pietra that NYU owns, and it's a museum. They're my most successful museum pictures, camera obscuras. Just crazy. I mean, libraries become open, and partitions. This is a beautiful Italian accordion divider where, well, you can sort of see the gardens are coming down on it. I mean, it's so Magritte. This is the Duomo inside another large place. It's very confusing because this place I was in had painted walls. So there are trees painted. I mean, it was totally M.C. Escher. And then the next room, it was painting and reflections and really wonderful. Constable, I've been interested in Constable for a very long time. When I was at Yale, I went to the British Museum a lot. I liked them a lot. Turner is good. I just love Constable's rough palette, like dirt. So I went to England for a trip to make pictures. After, I visited some of these places where he made paintings in the east of London. Very famous paintings. So I went to these locales. So, I don't know if you can tell, but where the tallest tree in the middle, to the left of it, imagine that in the water, that's like, so this is my tent picture of that site. And it looks like a painting, doesn't it? He painted gorgeous clouds, and he's sort of known for his cloud and weather pictures. This is my picture in Hampstead Heath. This is a wonderful pond in Hampstead Heath. And this is pure Constable. I mean, we got there, and I just saw that and was like, oh my God, this is like 20 feet from where he painted in Flatford Mills. And then I made a second one. Okay, we're going to end soon. Flowers for Lisa. Who doesn't like flowers, right? And I've always loved the work of everybody who made flowers, including John Bruegel, the son of the great Bruegel. Manet, who in his dying bed, basically the last month of his life, made a bunch of beautiful flower pictures. He was dying and he was making them. O'Keeffe, Warhol, Mapplethorpe, Joan Mitchell, Irving Penn. So, 3 years ago, I gave Lisa, I wanted to give her flowers for her birthday. And instead of doing that, I said, I'm going to make a special picture for her. So I bought lots of flowers and decided to do something, an experiment, and have my camera set up, a vase set up, have lots of flowers. It looked like a funeral home. And, it's just awful because of smell. But the experiment was to put 2 or 3 little bouquets, make a picture of that, take that off, put another set, take that off, shoot 20 variations of that. Now, in regular photography, film photography, when you combine all that, you get densities on densities and densities creating whites and blacks and all that. So it's an analog thing. If it's not well exposed, you can see through it. If it's too exposed, you see white. Well, when you show this stuff, these twin exposures to Photoshop, it's a different animal. Photoshop is actually trying to figure out what the hell this is. It says, okay, you're going to make that thing that was here before show up, but then there's another thing back there. Anyway, This is the picture that came out. It was like, we all gasped. After about half an hour of the machine working, it said, here it is. And I was like, holy shit. The nice thing is that you can go back to each file, and if you lose a flower in the process, you can bring it back. So there's a little bit of control. The control is a little bit like John Cage saying, I'm going to roll some dice and figure out the notes that way. Let chance take care of it. So this is the first one I made. Second. Then I'm going to show you a bunch. I just finished the last one, number 76. And that's the book. But I'll give you a little tour of the pictures. Flower stems. I guess I wanted to prove to people that, when it says, well, you're limiting yourself to one thing, it's sort of a prison. I looked at it like liberation. Give me one thing, I'll give you 76. And if I have more time, I'll give you 200. And I like that an artist has that as a possibility, that things can be reinvented, especially in the world of postmodernism. It was like, oh, it's all been done, who cares, just stupid ideology. An artist can look at something and try to, or even just a regular human being, reinvent a sense of what a subject is. So they're all quite different. In some ways, in this case, I actually put some flowers in that technique several times, but I also painted the vase and combined painting with the exposure. So you get a kind of a weird painterly thing. This is a cliché vert. This is 3 in a series where I painted the vases, and they're quite deep. They're like 4 feet deep, but I wanted this exaggerated, like Bruegel's, John Bruegel's pictures, where these vases hold 10 feet of flowers. That's not possible. Well, I wanted to create that kind of illusion. So this is number 1, number 2 of the same thing, and number 3. So they're kind of a series. I had to get the Rorschach in there. It took me a long time, because it was like, all these other Rorschachs were like of my mother, of course, This is painting multiple illustrations. I mean, it's one picture, but it's combining kind of a crazy mix of media. This is a tent camera in Seattle of a flower garden. And in some cases, I've dedicated them to certain artists, like Louise Bourgeois. She made a beautiful drawing of a flower, so I just punctured it to make an homage to her. And Ellsworth Kelly, I also punctured the Ellsworth Kelly drawing. My daughter Laura, my son Brady, Lisa and me in 76. We've been together since 76, a long time. A little bit like these guys. But I wanted to make a picture like Piero too. So this is Lisa and me. Sometimes the pavement, when it gets covered in front of my house, it looks like a tulip. And I drew it with crayons. And this is dedicated to Lewis Carroll. And this is a Van Gogh book, and I just took liberties with it. I painted my own 2 cents in it, and with lights coming in and out. Okay, I'm going to end with, so the last picture I made, number 76, I had this idea that it would copy something from Vertigo. And I've seen it 200 times, I just love the film. And there's a bouquet in it, or nosegay, I think that's the proper title, that Kim Novak gets. That Jimmy Stewart is looking at her and why'd she buy that bouquet? Anyway, there's a shot in Vertigo of the bouquet, and I always loved it. So I had, well, if you haven't seen the movie, that's the picture. And so I froze that frame. And I thought, okay, maybe I'll call some people in Cambridge, because that's a hip place. And I found this woman who's a florist, who said she couldn't really do exactly the same thing, but the idea of it. And this woman, who's my age, lived in San Francisco when she was 20 and looked for a job in the florist shop that's in this movie. It was amazing. It's like, are you kidding? Yeah, of course. So she sent me a picture, and she sent me a bouquet that I photographed. So that's the end of the book. But then I'm obsessed about things, so new project. I take 1 or 2 frames from Hitchcock's 53 or 54 films and make them over again. So this is a beginning, but call me psycho, but that's it. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Yes. Oh, yeah, this is being watched by the whole world, I guess, right? It's telecast? Even in Syria. Just kidding. Yes?
I'm the former registrar at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, where you are revered, so thank you for the tour back home for me this evening.
Oh, thank you.
I wonder about the tent setup, and do you decide in advance where you will put the tent based on what the ground is like, or is it all absolute happenstance because of what it is you're photographing?
Right, in some cases, like in Giverny and Monet's garden, I knew I wanted them, but there was only one type of gravel available. So, but in certain others, we'll scout and say that's the rocks here are pretty nice, or as opposed to that. So no, we look around, but it's the event that's happening out there that's more interesting.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yes.
So this is going to be one of those kind of weird, like, how do you do what you do questions, and I hope you don't hate me for it. But
I already hate you.
being also super immigrant-y and a Bowdoin grad, one of the things that I've been faced with post-Bowdoin and post-photography is how do you do what you do and are able to afford it without like sacrificing everything that you stand for?
Wow. Well, I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, so I have no problem. No, look, are you kidding? I started photography at Bowdoin in 1969. I did not sell my first picture until 1988. So the rest was, working as a doorman, cleaning buildings, stuff like that. I always found ways to make pictures. That's the important thing. You just make it and don't give up. I mean, this.
Did you teach in that time period?
I began to teach, thank you, in 1983 at Massachusetts College of Art, and that paid the rent. So teaching it's a great way to do it. I also you with young people who are interesting. So there's no quick answer. Kind of don't let the world determine what you think. I mean, that's pretty much the answer, though. I mean, just make it. I mean, like this Hitchcock thing. I've always loved this movie, and I know there was a way to do it. It's like, there's just no question that I want to make this picture. It's a matter of finding this woman in Cambridge. So I think you need to be obsessively involved in what you do, and I think people will feel that from you in some ways, and then maybe begin to help you. You're too young anyway, so yeah. No, it's hard. But I'd rather be the son of poor immigrants than some rich asshole. Yes.
Hi, thank you for the wonderful talk. My question is also about immigration indirectly. I think through your beautiful work, you've managed to make the immigrant experience accessible somehow, maybe through the aesthetics of your images, or maybe the mystery. And later, not only being an immigrant, but also being in a different place,
Right.
especially with your 10 pictures. I was wondering if that was, and I know this is a detailed question, but I wonder if that was always your intention, or did that emerge out of the work and you realized, wow, these people are really able to get what I'm trying to say?
I'm sorry, was my intention to...
Was that your intention all along, or did it emerge?
To do what? I'm sorry.
To make your experience as an immigrant accessible to the viewer.
Oh, never. No, that's, for me, that's the most boring thing you could ever do. Because it in some ways, it asks of people a certain pity, which is not useful and it's stupid. What you need to show is that you are a thinker and you have ideas and you're free to do whatever you want. If I started embarking on pictures to make the immigrant experience legible, it's not what I do. So I had a talk in Texas once, and I showed my work, and this really well-meaning woman actually said, "It's interesting that your work doesn't look like the work of a Cuban." But there's the trap right there, you know. If you start doing Cuban work, then in some ways you're sort of narrowing the whole entire your thing. Not that I do not want to be thought of as an immigrant, but those ghettos you have to watch out for, because then it becomes, oh, he's the thing. So I also said, you know what, Cubans can also make pictures of light bulbs. So I'm always for that kind of freedom. I'm against people who think badly of immigrants, but in my work I never felt like I had to explain an immigrant. I think Kafka didn't have to explain alienation, right? He just wrote, and I hope that that's the way I'm doing it. So anyway, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your work with us today. It was very beautiful and fascinating. I've always been struck by your Camera Obscura work. Back in the early 80s, my wife and I were in Richmond one time. We woke up on a blazingly bright day, but we had closed the blinds tight. But we woke up and on the wall we could see buses going by because we had played the curtains and they'd somehow fallen together, so there was that little hole. And I went, this was before I saw your work, but we were fascinated with it. We went and played with the shape of it and the size of it, and you could make it sharper and all that. And I noticed in your first work, the image is upside down.
Right.
And then I read in a magazine or somewhere that you had devised a way to flip it by
Right.
using a mirror. So I assumed that after that point you were always going to have the image upright. But then it's clear that later you've made decisions.
Yeah,
About
whatever
things.
looks better,
I see.
I'll choose. So in some cases, upside down looks better, you know.
I find
so.
that's one of the more interesting things to me, that you decide to change it back from where it used to be. But can you tell us a little bit about how you switch it back? How is it switched over? How is it not inverted?
Magic.
I mean, what are you doing to it? Is it going through a mirror somehow?
You have to know that I spent a lot of time on the phone and emailing people, scientists, all that. So now I have a lens instead of a hole. The lens is like a diopter, and a diopter will focus at a certain distance. I have about 30 of them. So if a room is 12 feet deep, I have a diopter that's about 11, so that's good. But if you put a large prism in front of that, it flips.
Okay.
See, now it's my life.
Thank you.
Yeah, good luck with that. Thank you.
Can you explain a little bit more about the flower series in terms of, well, first of all, your wife's very blessed to have, what a gift. Are those being how are they going to be made available? Are you selling them or are you keeping them as a set? Are they going to different museums? Are they...
Do you want to get a whole set?
Well, I think Laura deserves the whole set, but
they're available.
It's a beautiful collection. I'm trying to
They're
see
available
its
through-
future.
Well, they're available through my gallery, but Abrams is publishing the entire series next fall, so it's from 1 to 76. And you know, I'll do more flowers, but now it feels like I don't wake up in the morning going, shit, I have to get some more flower pictures. And yeah.
So I can hope to see one at SAAM, in other words, possibly.
If there's someone with the right amount of money who wants to donate something to SAAM, yes.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you. I just wanted to understand how they move forward. Thank you.
It's pure capitalism. Thank you.
And this
Yes.
is going to be the last question.
Okay, last question. Better be good.
I hope so. So I remember in high school, my first photography class, we learned the basics. Pinhole camera, literally putting a pin in it, taking it out to like the baseball field and just letting the light hit it and see what happens. And then, and in the same class, we see your work to see an example of like a larger example of that. And I've always, since high school, looked at your work and then been like, how big was that hole? Or, what was going on there? Do you have any pictures of the other side that you can show us, or anything just like of the in a hotel room of all the windows taped up? Or I've
I
always
do. I have some production shots, but the early ones, the one like the picture that you guys own, that's just with a hole about the size of a dime.
Okay.
So that a hole will give you that.
Yeah.
So run with it, but but because of the, now I wanted sharpness, so there's a way to get special lenses. They're called diopters, they're like reading glasses, but high end, so you can say this diopter can be ground to focus at 15 feet. It's useful.
Cool.
Or 30 feet, or whatever. But just a dime, You know, that's enough. Right?
Thanks.
Thank you all for coming.